The war against Iran was supposed to demonstrate strength. Instead, it may have triggered a chain reaction that is reshaping global politics, energy markets, and economic stability. When military strikes began, the expectation in Washington was clear. A show of force would weaken Iran's strategic capabilities and restore deterrence across the Middle East. But geopolitics rarely follows simple calculations. Instead of a quick strategic victory, the conflict has expanded into something far more complex. A global crisis touching energy markets, international alliances, and economic stability around the world. To understand why this situation has become so dangerous, we need to look at how the conflict actually unfolded. The escalation did not begin overnight. For years, tensions between the United States and Iran had been building around sanctions, nuclear negotiations, and regional influence. The situation intensified dramatically when U.S. and Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes on Iranian targets in early 2026. Those attacks targeted military infrastructure and key strategic locations inside Iran. Iran responded quickly. Missile and drone attacks were launched against U.S. bases and regional allies across the Gulf. At the same time, the conflict spread into nearby regions, involving actors across Lebanon, Iraq, and other parts of the Middle East. The result was something far larger than a bilateral confrontation. It became a regional crisis with global consequences. One of the most critical developments came in the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow maritime passage between Iran and Oman carries around 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply. When the conflict escalated, shipping traffic through the strait dropped dramatically as vessels avoided the area due to security risks. Within days, global oil prices surged past $100 per barrel as energy markets reacted to the sudden disruption. That price shock quickly spread across the global economy. Fuel prices rose. Transportation costs increased. Airlines began adjusting routes. Financial markets experienced volatility as investors tried to calculate the potential economic fallout. Stock markets also reacted to the uncertainty, with major indexes slipping amid fears of prolonged disruption in global energy supplies. And the impact did not stop there. The disruption in the Persian Gulf also threatened global food production. Fertilizer supply chains rely heavily on shipping routes passing through the region. When shipping slowed and energy prices rose, fertilizer costs surged as well, raising fears about agricultural production and global food prices. This is where the war began to backfire politically. One of the central promises behind aggressive energy policy was that domestic production would shield the United States from global oil shocks, but oil is traded on global markets. Even when a country produces its own energy, global price disruptions still ripple through domestic economies. As a result, rising fuel prices began to undermine the political narrative that the U.S. could remain insulated from international crises. Energy analysts warned that relying on fossil fuel markets meant remaining vulnerable to geopolitical shocks, especially in regions as strategically critical as the Persian Gulf. At the same time, Iran demonstrated a strategy designed to counter its conventional military disadvantage. Rather than confronting U.S. forces directly in large-scale battles, Iran focused on asymmetric tactics. These included missile strikes, drone attacks, and economic pressure through energy routes. One of the most striking examples involved low-cost drone boats targeting oil tankers in the Gulf. These relatively inexpensive systems were capable of disrupting shipping traffic and triggering massive economic consequences. In other words, the battlefield expanded far beyond traditional military confrontation. It became an economic battlefield. Energy flows, shipping routes, financial markets, global supply chains, all became part of the strategic equation. This strategy reflects a long-standing doctrine within Iran's military planning. Instead of matching U.S. military power directly, Iran focuses on raising the cost of confrontation. And in that sense, the strategy has worked. Even limited disruption in the Gulf has forced governments, companies, and markets around the world to respond. Another unexpected consequence of the conflict has been the shift in global alliances. Countries across Asia depend heavily on energy shipments from the Persian Gulf. China, India, Japan, and South Korea all rely on the stability of these maritime routes. When instability threatens these supplies, geopolitical calculations change. Some countries move closer together diplomatically. Others seek alternative energy partnerships. Meanwhile, rival powers such as Russia and China gain strategic leverage when Western powers become entangled in regional conflicts. This is why geopolitical crises rarely remain contained. They ripple outward through economic systems and alliance networks, and sometimes the consequences reshape the global balance of power. But perhaps the most dangerous risk is miscalculation. In complex conflicts involving multiple actors, escalation does not always follow deliberate plans. Small incidents can trigger wider reactions. A drone strike, a naval confrontation, a missile interception gone wrong. Each of these events carries the potential to widen the conflict further, and when multiple countries become involved, controlling escalation becomes far more difficult. For global markets, the biggest threat is uncertainty. Markets can adapt to bad news, but they struggle to adapt to unpredictable events. When traders, investors, and governments cannot estimate the scale of a crisis, volatility spreads quickly across financial systems. That is exactly what we are witnessing today. Energy markets are unstable. Shipping routes are uncertain. Financial markets are reacting to geopolitical risk. And political leaders are trying to manage a situation that has become far more complicated than initially expected. Which brings us to the central question: did the war against Iran achieve its strategic objectives? Or did it trigger a series of consequences that are now reshaping the global system in unpredictable ways? In geopolitics, actions rarely exist in isolation. Every decision sets off a chain of reactions. Sometimes those reactions strengthen deterrence, but other times they create new pressures that ripple far beyond the original conflict. The current crisis may ultimately become one of those moments, a moment when a regional confrontation transformed into a global shock. A moment when the strategic calculus changed for multiple powers simultaneously, and a moment that reminds us of a simple truth. In geopolitics, the biggest risks often appear after the first strike. This is Geonexis, the world in focus,